people power. It served as well to put the British government on notice that the struggle for national independence had been effectively aroused now that satyagraha was becoming a widespread practice. It also caught the attention of burgeoning national and civil struggles in other parts of the world, as in Ireland and the American South. As mentioned before, 17 years later, India achieved her independence non-violently, and the British left India without a shot being fired. And yet, important as national independence was to Gandhi, it was not the main goal of his satyagraha. Rather, Gandhi held up Swaraj, or moral self-government, as his true ideal. Under Swaraj, so a social revolution in addition, social and moral revolution in addition to a national revolution. Under Swaraj, a community would live by its own truth and resist all authority when it violates such truth. It is significant that as independence approached, Gandhi suggested quite seriously to the leaders of the Indian National Congress that they disband and form a social service organization that would educate the masses about the moral power they possess and the obligation that they have to resist unjust authority. One need hardly mention that in this respect, Gandhi was not listened to. So, final conclusion here. In this presentation, I've tried to blend philosophical and historical considerations about Gandhi's satyagraha so as to illustrate the close unity of theory and practice in his life and work. Satyagraha is, however, an essentially creative praxis, requiring ever new and fresh applications. And that was the point of mentioning some of these applications at the very start of my remarks. In one form or another, Gandhi has served as an inspiration for a whole host of nonviolent freedom struggles, from the civil rights movement in the US to independence struggles in places as disparate and as politically and culturally different as South Africa, Eastern Europe, the Philippines, and the former Soviet Union, and also now in the Middle East. And these days, newspapers report that the ongoing political reforms unfolding in Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East have been influenced in part by the writings of Gene Sharp, who has long been a student and fervent admirer of Gandhi. The New York Times of February 17th of this year, for example, relates he, that is Gene Sharp, was struck by the Egyptian protesters' discipline in remaining peaceful, and especially by their lack of fear. This is straight out of Gandhi, Mr. Sharp said. Gandhi, on his part, would not have been in the least surprised that his method of satyagraha still has power to create nonviolent revolution. Thanks very much. Keen, Robert, on hearing your remarks.
Okay, try. See what I can do.
Robert, this is the...
Oh, you need to,
Okay.
yeah. Does he need to put that in his pocket?
Just put it in my pocket?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And then this goes up here, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got that.
Okay. So.
Okay. Sure.
Good. Well, let me put a few words on the... give you a
Please,
moment
please,
to
please. Yeah.
think, and give us all a moment to organize our topics for when you questions. My purpose, as you know, is to draw out Joseph. So the first part is critique. And critique of industrialism and imperialism. Oh, we'll go to capitalism first. This is awful. Capitalism and what are you doing? We're having these technological difficulties. Okay. And then the alternative, satyagraha, which is a series of, it's really positive, but it involves a series of not, for example, not possession, and obviously not violence, but really what is underlying and what is the purpose is love. So it's not just non-non, but on the way to loving you have to discipline and control. Okay, then certain important principles that I want to draw out. Means and ends, continuity of means and ends, and then the non-separation of religion and politics, the non-separation of the personal and the civic, also national, unity of theory and practice. Okay, and then I'm going to put down, let's put it, Gandhi's legacy. Okay, and how consistent is it? Is it mixed? Is it possible, etc.? I have a couple of examples for us to think about and maybe talk about. One is the American Civil War. Another one is World War II. And then the ones that Joseph mentioned, these amazing crumblings. But we might want to go directly to the sort of the Arab Spring of 2011. Let me just make a few comments about some of these topics. Joseph, thanks very much. And maybe draw you out a little bit. So there's the, I can't even read this, industrialization, capitalism, imperialism. Now there's an interesting, lively discussion in this program about the inherent sort of dead end of capitalism. It's quite a strong critique. But in terms of industrialization, I think most of us are convinced that we're past this. We're in an entirely different, I mean, the West, certainly America, is past the problems of industrialization. We've farmed that out, which isn't to say that it's over. It is to say that it's not our primary mode. But capitalism, of course, is stronger than ever as a result of the collapse of the former Soviet Union as the major alternative. So it's really riding high. And of course, imperialism is perhaps stronger than ever. I want to give you this line. Ellen and I were at the discussion on Sunday, and the speaker quoted Tacitus, who interviewed people in the outer reaches of the Roman Empire, who said that what Rome calls peace, we call devastation, which sounds about right. So what I'm suggesting is that the critique, even if you don't do industrialization, you could do the latest version, whatever word you want to use for it, of capitalism and imperialism is is fairly well developed among people in a program like this, and in I think many people in the younger generation who are convinced that we've come to the end. A lot of it is, of course, dictated by ecological awareness. So that's just something I'm taking in as a possible area of Gandhi's contribution, but it may also be that some of what he is critiquing here under industrialization, capitalism, and imperialism, especially the first two, may maybe somewhat spent, in the sense of the problems have morphed very considerably since the first half of the 20th century. And what we're dealing with now is much more complicated on all three of those categories. And perhaps we get into a conversation or not, you might just want to, I don't know which of these topics you want to take up. Now with the Satyagraha, I think it's quite wonderful that there's emphasis on love. But the Gorton Ash book that I mentioned to you, reviewed in the New York Review of Books, about these various revolutions around the world. One of the ones we didn't mention was the unsuccessful one in Burma, Myanmar. And the conclusion of that book, by very, very expert people, is that the nonviolence seemed to have, when it worked, it seemed to have worked because there was first off a mix of violence and nonviolence, and secondly, that even when it wasn't actually mixed, there was the threat of violence. And so that's a whole question of the examples that we could draw historically and say, could nonviolence have worked in this case where we used violence, or would it really have been unrealistic? My favorite examples are the Civil War. There was just a book out. I haven't read it. I read a long review about someone trying to show that it would have been possible to avoid the Civil War. I mean, after all, England ended slavery without a civil war. Canada ended slavery without. Canada also achieved independence from Britain without a revolutionary war. So, maybe something was possible. From what I know of the Civil War, I'm inclined to think that it would not have been possible. So that's a whole interesting question, Joseph. I'm skipping, but I'm coming back in a minute to the top pieces. But I think the hardest example for a strong commitment to Gandhian nonviolence is the Second World War. Because here I think that Aurobindo's disagreement with Gandhi was probably accurate, namely that the enemy in that case was really working trying to attain world domination, and by military means, and it seemed that it had the power to succeed for a very, very long time, maybe sort of indefinitely. You don't even have to go to whether it was occult influence, just the amount of